Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a concept that honestly sounds completely sci-fi, but is actually very, very real: vanishing nations. You know, when we think of a country, we usually picture something super permanent, right? Solid, unchanging lines drawn on a map, deeply rooted institutions, this lasting cultural footprint. But history and science, well, they're telling us a very different story right now. We're going to explore the very real fact that, as we speak, there are nations literally on the brink of extinction.
Sounds kind of like magic, doesn't it? But really ask yourself, do you know what it actually means for a modern nation to just vanish? It's really easy to assume a country only disappears through some massive, sudden, catastrophic event, like a total war or an overnight political collapse. And sure, while those things absolutely do happen, the reality for countries facing this threat today is way more gradual and frankly a lot more complex. It's definitely not a magic trick, it's a profound, slow-motion transformation.
Section 1. Redefining a disappearing nation. The myth versus the reality. So to really wrap our heads around this, we have to completely dismantle that myth of a sudden disappearing act. The absolutely crucial point here is that a country doesn't just fall off the map, it transforms. Disappearing doesn't mean the land physically vanishes into thin air while we're sleeping. Instead, it means a state loses its habitable land over decades, or it goes through severe depopulation, merges politically with someone else, or faces such dramatic environmental or economic shifts that its core national identity is permanently altered. It's basically erasure by 1,000 cuts.
Section 2. The sinking island states. The front lines of climate change.
Let's start with the most immediate, tangible threat out there, the one that really brings this reality to life: rising sea levels. This perfectly illustrates the sheer vulnerability of small island nations. For several countries around the globe, their entire existence rests just a few meters, and honestly, sometimes literally a few feet above the ocean. Think about the Maldives for a second. Its highest natural point is less than 8 feet. When your country's highest peak is shorter than a standard diving board, global sea level rise is not some abstract, far-off debate. It is an immediate, existential threat. We're talking salt water intruding into freshwater supplies, ruining the agriculture, while stronger storms and coastal erosion physically eat away at people's homes and infrastructure.
If we look closely at the Maldives, Tuvalu, and Kiribati, we see the rule of 3 in action. 3 unique geographies, 3 distinct challenges, and 3 desperate fights for survival. The Maldives, for instance, relies super heavily on tourism, but with land hovering just a few feet above the ocean, they're pouring massive investments into seawalls and literally building artificial islands. Then you have Tuvalu, which has extremely limited land area to begin with. Flooding there is already threatening their drinking water, which is forcing them to ask unprecedented questions like, how do you maintain citizenship if your physical land is lost? And then Kiribati, which is spread across numerous coral atolls, is heavily focused right now on climate financing and long-term relocation strategies to somehow protect their future generations.
It brings up this really powerful point. These unprecedented challenges illustrate exactly how climate change is reshaping our traditional concepts of nationhood and territorial boundaries. Because this isn't just about water, right? It's about what happens to a culture and a functioning government when its physical land simply becomes uninhabitable. If the citizens of Kiribati or Tuvalu have to entirely relocate to another country, do they remain a sovereign nation? How on earth does a government operate without physical territory? These are the exact, incredibly thorny questions that international law is struggling to answer right now.
Section 3. Political and demographic threats. The invisible erasure. Now, let's zoom out a bit. We've talked about physical land, but how can a nation disappear without losing a single inch of physical ground? Well, history brilliantly illustrates that borders are definitely not permanent. Just look back at the early 1990s. In just a tiny 3-year span, the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia completely vanished from the map through political dissolution. They dissolved, they divided, and they underwent major political transformations that entirely reshaped international borders as we knew them. And while today's geopolitical landscape looks a bit different, analysts are constantly monitoring regions where internal conflicts, economic pressures, or constitutional disputes could absolutely trigger similar state-altering shifts today.
There is a really vivid contrast here. On one side, you have the physical forces of nature tearing at the land. Things like rising sea levels, coastal erosion, severe storms, water scarcity, and desertification. But on the other side, you have human threats slowly hollowing out a nation's workforce and political stability right from the inside. Environmental disasters place immense pressure on resources, for sure. But things like an aging population, severe brain drain, constitutional disputes,
and prolonged economic collapse, those human factors can be just as fatal to a nation's long-term future.
Think about what happens when young people leave their home country in search of better opportunities. A severe brain drain occurs. Now, combine that massive emigration with aging populations and historically low birth rates, and demographic decline creates a huge quiet crisis. Shrinking workforces directly means slower economic growth, and that, in turn, puts this crushing pressure on healthcare systems, pensions, and public finances. It's a total vicious cycle that significantly weakens national resilience over time, eventually altering the entire cultural and economic landscape.
Section 4. The Battle for Survival, Engineering a Future.
Okay, so this explainer isn't just about doom and gloom. Let's pivot and look at the incredible resilience and sheer human innovation being deployed right now to fight back. To adapt to these existential challenges, nations are bringing out some incredible technological firepower. We are literally watching science fiction concepts turn into daily survival tools. To combat water scarcity, countries are going all in on desalination and water recycling. They're using artificial intelligence and advanced satellite monitoring systems for pinpoint disaster forecasting. And we are seeing absolutely massive breakthroughs in climate-resilient agriculture and advanced coastal defenses. It's all about securing food and living spaces against a rapidly changing planet.
But adapting to these threats isn't random. It's a very structured process. Step 1 is all about understanding the data, forecasting and monitoring using those advanced satellites and scientific models. Step 2 is getting your hands dirty and physically changing the landscape to withstand the threats. We're talking investing in physical adaptations, from massive seawalls to, like the Maldives, literally pumping sand to build new artificial islands. And step 3? Well, that's perhaps the hardest part, securing the international cooperation and global climate financing required to actually pay for these massive engineering feats. Because let's be real, resilience isn't cheap, and vulnerable communities simply cannot do it alone.
Section 5. The Future of Global Borders, Redrawing the Map.
Let's take a macroscopic view to wrap things up and see how this all builds into an unprecedented challenge for international relations. Why this matters to you, wherever you are in the world right now, is that if these nations fall, the resulting displacement and redrawn global boundaries are going to impact international law, global economics, and human migration everywhere on Earth. Seriously, who owns the fishing rights or the maritime boundaries if the island that originally defined them is suddenly underwater? How does the global community support massive displaced populations while still protecting their political rights and their cultural preservation? The truth is, we simply do not have the legal frameworks for this in the 21st century yet.
I want to leave you with this really provocative thought, because the future of global borders isn't just about geography. It's about what truly makes us a nation. If a country's land disappears entirely but its people survive, does the nation still exist? Are we defined purely by the physical dirt and soil we stand on, or by our shared culture, our resilience, and our collective human identity? As we look ahead to the coming decades, human innovation and global cooperation are going to be put to the ultimate test to ensure that the diversity, cultures, and sovereignty of these nations are preserved for generations to come.